We can be. We can be. We're not yet. For those of you expecting the Morro Bay City Council meeting to start, it will follow the meeting of the Morro Bay Public Facilities Corporation on June 25th, 2019, by adoption of Resolution 56-19. The Morro Bay City Council authorized the formation of the Morro Bay Public Facilities Corporation to facilitate financing of the Water Reclamation Facility, or the WRF, and potentially other future capital improvements. This is the Board of Directors. This is a special meeting. We are at Veterans Hall, 209 Surf Street, Morro Bay, California. It's 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, January 14th, 2020. We do have a quorum of directors, and I will call the meeting to order. With that, I will open up public comment for any members of the public that wish to speak on any items on this agenda. Only on this agenda, please come forward now. I don't have any speaker slips. Barry, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, staff. Barry Brandon, City of Morro Bay. The thing that concerns me is, believe me, I did read the documents, 400, 500 pages, I don't know. I didn't see an option for, you're doing the financing, I understand that. But if there is no permit to build the plant where you're talking about, I didn't see a back door. And I wonder if you'll be able to discuss that this evening, because as I understand it, you don't have a permit at this time. The EIR is being consulted, and if it does boil down that it cannot be done at that location, and you're pledging the revenue from our ratepayers, how do you undo the string? And that's a question I'd like to have answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment is still open for items on this agenda only of the Morro Bay Public Facilities Corporation. Any members of the public wishing to come forward, please do so now. Seeing none and having no speaker slips, I will close public comment, bring it back to the board, and during your presentation, Mr. Casares, perhaps you could answer the question that was asked by Mr. Brannon and or our legal counsel as well. With that, item 1 is approval of the minutes for August 13th, 2019 special meeting. Do I have a motion for approval?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Director McPherson and second by Director Davis. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
I have to think about this.
Yes.
Director McPherson.
Yes.
Director Davis.
Yes.
Director Addis.
Yes.
Director Heller.
Yes.
And President Heading.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 2, adoption of resolution number PFC 01-20, approving financing of the Water Reclamation Facility project with proceeds from the United States Environmental Protection Agency under the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. With that, we have a number of presenters, I think, but will I start with Mr. Casares or with council? Turn it over to council. Thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. So tonight we have before the Morro Bay Public Facilities Corporation a resolution to approve essentially 6 agreements. 4 of them are contracts with the City of Morro Bay, and then 2 of them are contracts with the federal government. These 6 agreements, which are proposed for approval through one resolution, would be to allow for financing through the federal government of the water reclamation facility. I have here tonight with me special counsel, my business partner, Anita Luck, to my left, and she's here to answer any questions about the financing and the legal ins and outs of the financial structures that are being proposed. And then, of course, the WARF program manager, Eric Casares, is here tonight to also talk about the general background of what is being proposed tonight for consideration. So I'll turn it over to the program manager, and my business partner, Anita, and I are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chris. Just wanted to take a couple minutes here to go through just a brief presentation to go over some of the background around the WIFIA loan itself and the rate study that was completed for the project. So our recommendation here this evening is that I think the corporation adopt resolution number PFC 01-20, approving proceedings to finance the new water reclamation facility project from the proceeds of 2 installment sales agreements between the city and the Morro Bay Public Facilities Corporation, as each agreement is assigned to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and related documentation. So really, while we're here tonight, it really draws back to one of the main goals for the water reclamation facility project, which has been all aspects of the work project shall be completed, ensuring economic value with a special emphasis on minimizing ratepayer and city expense. So the city, a number of years ago, going back about 3 or 4 years ago, made it a goal, one, to maximize the cost effectiveness of the project, and in doing so, decided to go after a number of different low-interest loan and grant opportunities. One of those that we're talking about here tonight is through the Environmental Protection Agency and their Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. So this has been a long time coming and is really the end of the road for a significant portion of the financing for the project. So this table up here shows kind of the field of play that we had back in 2018 when we were developing the rate study that was done by Bartle Wells at that time, and really shows the different low-interest loan and grant opportunities that are here. A couple under the Clean Water SRF program. At the time when we were preparing the rate study, we had secured a $10.3 million planning loan from SRF. We were considering applying for another construction loan through the SRF program, the Clean Water SRF program, or the State Revolving Fund program. And we had submitted a final application, or we're in the midst of submitting a final application for the WIFIA program. Now, the rate study that was done in 2018 was actually a follow-on to the previous rate study that was done in 2015. The 2015 rate study looked at sewer rates based on 75% of a $75 million project that the city was looking at, and also looked at raising funds to help strengthen the condition of the water and sewer facilities. The 2018 rate study, which followed on, looked at additional rate increases necessary to fund a $126 million Morro Bay only project, and also considered a number of water and sewer capital projects that were identified in 2017 by the city's One Water Plan. So what was the basis of the WRF cost? This graph here shows the breakdown of the WRF project cost components. Again, a $126 million project is what was considered in the 2018 rate study. And this was made up of the various components. You can see the water reclamation facility itself here at about $74 million, conveyance facilities at $26, some general program costs, and the cost for the offsite facilities. And one of the exercises that was gone through during the rate study was looking at apportioning the cost of the project between the water and sewer funds. So how were the costs for the WRF project being split? And again, this was done back in 2018. And this is important because the different funding agencies that are looking at funding the project are funding different portions. Some are funding heavier on the wastewater side, and some are funding heavier on the water side. So this was something that was done back in in 2018 to apportion the total $126 million cost between water and sewer. So at the time when that rate study was completed, this is essentially how we envisioned paying for or funding the WRF project. We had a roughly $60 million WIFIA loan that we were looking at. We had the $10.3 million planning loan, and we had about $25 million of revenue bonds. So one thing to note, and as I get into some future slides, you'll see we didn't base the rate analysis on receiving a significant construction loan from the State Revolving Fund program. That program has changed over recent years. It's quite a bit more competitive, and so we thought it was conservative, and the best thing to do at the time was to look at funding the project and what it would cost to fund the project without the contribution from SRF. And we also had significant cash contributions to the tune of about about $27 million. So what was the determined rate impact? This should all look pretty familiar to folks. So the base case in this table over here to the left, the $41 surcharge, $25 for sewer and $16 for water, are essentially what was adopted. And one of the things to note here is that, and this will come into play later on when we talk about the actual impact of the WIFIA loan as we have all of the terms and conditions that have been finalized, is the column all the way to the right, which is the no recycling option. So as part of the rate study, one of the things that Bartle Wells did look at is if we just had a project that did not include recycled water, which was about a $100 million project, and the assumption was made that if we didn't have recycling, we wouldn't be competitive for these low-interest loans, and so we would have to finance that project using bonds and pay for portions of it with cash. It was roughly a $44 surcharge for a $100 million project. So our base case was a $126 million project that was being paid for by a $41 surcharge. So you can see the value, the anticipated value that we had when we did the rate study for that WIFIA loan. And we can get into kind of the specifics of that when we get towards the end of this presentation and what we're actually asking the corporation to adopt. Again, this will also look familiar, which is the overall rate impacts. This shows the overall rate impacts to the average ratepayer, combined water and sewer of $191 per month. So that's kind of a recap of what went into the 2018 rate study. And as folks remember, we then went through the 218 process and adopted those rates that went into effect in July of this year. So as we worked on finalizing the terms and the conditions with WIFIA, we needed to do some additional financial analysis because the funding landscape has changed a bit. We have our $10.3 million planning loan, but in June of this year, the SRF status for the city changed, and SRF is now a much more real possibility in terms of the city being funded this year for that. Also, the interest rates have changed. As you can see from the previous slide, the current interest rate for the state revolving fund is about 1.6%. And what you'll see in the resolution here tonight for the WIFIA loan is about 2.4% for WIFIA, whereas when we did the 2018 rate study, we had assumed an interest rate of about 3.25%. So the funding landscape has changed in terms of the interest rates, both the interest rates and the certainty by which we think we're going to be getting the SRF money. And that's summarized here. So the rate the rate study was finalized in the summer of 2018. We submitted our final SRF application in December of 2018. We received the score for our application, which made us very competitive, and that was essentially finalized in June. Oh, excuse me. Thanks, Rob. In June of that year, the state board adopted their intended use plan, which had identified Morro Bay to be funded by the SRF program in excess of $100 million. So as we went through and we completed this additional financial analysis, it was prudent for us to assume that we would be able to use a portion of the funding. A portion of the funding would be done by SRF. And that's reflected here in this graph. It's hopefully showing up here. There we go. which we're looking at about $48.5 million of the project being funded by an SRF loan, about $48.5 million being funded by a WIFIA loan, $5 million from an SRF grant that was identified in the intended use plan, and then some additional cash funding to the tune of about $24 million. Again, that's summarized on this table here and shows the split between the water and the sewer funds and how that splits out. One of the things that was identified in the staff report that we did want to mention, again, the reason why the city is pursuing these lower interest loans is, again, minimizing the ratepayer impact and really the benefit of WIFIA. So based on the terms that we're looking at in the resolution, looking at conventional bond funding, the contribution from WIFIA versus using conventional bond funding for this portion of the project is about a $28 million reduction in the debt service. That's really the value of the WIFIA low interest loan that we're talking about here tonight. Again, the recommendation is that you adopt resolution number PFC 01-20, approving proceedings to finance the new wharf project from the proceeds of 2 installment sale agreements between the city and the corporation, as each agreement is assigned to the U.S. EPA and related documentation. That's the end of the presentation, and I can answer any questions about the rate study and the WIFIA process itself, and then Chris and Anita can answer some of the specific questions about the corporation and some of the documentation that you'll see in the staff report.
Just to answer Mr. Brannon's question, we can liken this to a line of credit, or a home equity line of credit that most people are familiar with. We're only paying on the amount that actually gets borrowed. So we'll perform construction operations, we'll submit invoices to EPA, WIFIA program, and reimburse for what is submitted to them. So if perchance we don't submit an invoice to WIFIA, there is no loan and therefore no payment is required.
Thank you, Mr. Casares. Thank you, Mr. Leivik. I'm going to open up with a few questions and then allow any directors. This is not a city council meeting, it's a board of directors meeting, so I'll allow you to chime in as you see fit after I ask a few questions. First, for legal counsel, could you remind the public of the rationale and why the city had to form a Morro Bay Public Facilities Corporation, and how that relates to the city council with regard to what the corporation is approving tonight and what the city council later will be asked to approve this evening? Green light will come on when you press the button. There you go. You're not coming through. Get her close. Yeah, could be the broken one.
Okay. Due to the complexities of the state and federal laws, the city had to form a corporation to assist in the financing of the wastewater treatment plant. This helps the city do a financing that is secured by a special fund like the water fund and the wastewater fund, and so that only those funds are at risk in this financing and that there's no reach to any other funds of the city. The corporation is an entity that in a way protects the city a little bit in the financing, and the corporation and the city will enter into the installment sale agreement whereby the corporation agrees to undertake the financing for the city and build the plant, and the city will make payments to the corporation to buy the plant back from the corporation. So by the end of the term of the loan, the city has the plant and owns the plant. The title actually is transferred immediately to the city of the plant. And the payment stream is assigned to the Environmental Protection Agency in order to raise the funds for the project. And so that's how the financing is accomplished. It's a normal type of financing in California for these kinds of water and wastewater projects. So I don't know if that helps.
That's clear, and it's my interpretation or assumption tonight that the corporation is approving contracts with the city and then 2 assignments.
And 2
that-
assignments,
And
yes.
then our city council, at our city council meeting, we are only approving agreements with the corporation, and there are 4 of those on the agenda for that. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
Great. Thank you for that, information. A couple questions for staff with regard to the funding. The WIFIA program rate assumption that you have in at least what you presented, Mr. Casares, is based upon the rate today. That would be somewhere between about 2.2 and 2.4%. When do we assume we might actually lock in the rate?
We've been talking with WIFIA staff, and this goes back to another hot topic, which is the start of construction and getting through the environmental process, considering our consultation with Fish and Wildlife. As soon as that process is complete, we can close the environmental process, which will allow us to, there's a, I'm going to butcher the term. There's like a vesting period once that's completed before we can actually sign the loan and lock in the rate. Based on our current schedule and anticipation of closing the environmental process, we're looking at mid-February for when we would lock in the rate.
So if we close today, the rate, I just looked it up today, would be 2.17%. And so the assumption that you're making, you're comfortable that it'll be in the range of 2.2 to 2.4.
That's correct.
And is your $28 million savings and debt service based upon a 2.2 or a 2.4% assumption?
I believe it's based on the 2.4% assumption.
Higher. So it may even be a greater savings given the fact that the 10-year has remained stable and declined significantly in the last year?
Correct.
Okay, great. This is, and just for the public, if you could answer the question, I know you mentioned it in your presentation. This is a drawdown loan. In other words, we can draw down up to a maximum amount, or as Mr. Leivik said, it's like a line of credit, and you're only drawing funds that then will incur interest on the principal that is drawn down at the time it's drawn down. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But the interest rate remains fixed for all of the draws over the full period of the drawdown, which may be 3, 4, 5 years?
That's correct, yeah. So once we lock in that rate is applicable to any of the draws that we do between now and, I can't remember the date offhand in the resolution, but yeah, for the next 3 or 4 years roughly.
Got it, okay. And then, let's see, the calculation of $28 million savings and debt service, again, does not include any funds received potentially from SRF?
That is correct.
And we would have probably additional savings associated with that because the assumption on that rate was higher.
That's correct.
Okay, great. This loan, I noticed on page 7 of the staff report, interest rates for both, right in the middle paragraph after cash funding. Second sentence, interest rates for both programs are subject to change until locked in based on current interest rates. The present value, is that net present value? Maybe Ms. Callaway can, is that net present value? The 28, I'm on page 7, right in the middle, after cash funding.
Yeah,
The sentence where it says the present value, is that net present value?
yes,
Okay, so that 28 million is in today's,
today's dollar.
thank you, that helps, I appreciate that, that's important. And secondarily, or maybe thirdly, Mr. Casares, is there any possibility of losing this funding between now and the time the documents are signed? In other words, what would be trippers that would not allow us to actually execute this commitment?
At this time, there's essentially environmental, technical, financial reviews that need to be done in order to receive the funding. And then also, obviously, the finalization of the terms and conditions. At this point in time, the technical and financial reviews are all completed. And as I mentioned previously, the only thing that's holding up the signing of the loan is closing the environmental process, which we are working through that, and we've got a path forward in getting that done in the next several weeks.
Okay. And then this is, as I understand, prepayable with no prepayment penalty whatsoever. So if we decide to pay down on a cash basis part of the principal and debt that we've incurred, there's no penalty for that, correct?
Correct.
But a minimum payment requirement is $250,000?
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Whoever wants to answer that. Okay, I just want to make sure I understand it. And
That's
the
correct.
Debt service ratio requirement, 1.2 or 1.1? It's a little
Yes, that's
confusing.
the rate covenant, 1.2, and 1.1 with subordinate debt, yes.
So that would mean we have to have adequate cash available in the enterprise fund to make sure we cover the debt ratio, and that may be a reason for accumulating cash. Is that a correct assumption?
That's correct.
Okay. And perhaps my second to last question is, oh gosh, where's my point here? I guess that was it. Wow, that's probably too much. Thank you for your presentation. Well done. And I'll open it up to any directors that have questions for
I
staff
do
or...
have-
Sure.
I do have just a couple.
Director McPherson.
Thank you. I think I'm going to ask our legal team this question. Explain to us about the collateral requirement that is in this agreement, the collateral that we're going to basically pledge to the EPA.
Sure. The collateral that you pledge to the EPA is generally the net revenues, so it is the revenues you receive from your water or sewer fund, depending on which financing we're talking about, less the operating and maintenance expenses. There are also some funds that will be created that those funds will go into to pay WIFIA, so that when the payment comes up, and so those net revenues will be put in certain funds, and then those funds will be pledged to WIFIA. But generally, it is the net revenues from your water and sewer rates that are going to be pledged to WIFIA. If
Okay.
you enact some diff fees or something for this, then those might be pledged as well. But generally, it's just the net revenues of the water
Okay.
and sewer.
And you did explain that this is basically a requirement, a funding requirement placed on the city by the EPA in order to provide for this financing. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, yes.
Yeah, and in simple terms, just so, because it seems very convoluted to the public that we're creating a public corporation and we're dealing with the city and then we're et cetera, et cetera. Could you just in simple terms tell us what this agreement, why we're doing this and what it means to the city?
Okay. Well, you are doing this to be able to raise the funds to buy the wastewater treatment plant. And so what it means to the city is that you'll be able to construct the wastewater treatment plant, and the city will pay back the money for this financing with revenues from the ratepayers.
Okay. So it's a requirement and it protects the city. Is that essentially it? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Other director questions?
Eric, where do we, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, Director Davis.
Okay.
Recognizing you.
Thank you. Eric, where do we stand with the SRF loan?
The SRF loan is, we're in a good position for the SRF loan. Obviously, the environmental review delays that we've got on WIFIA, they directly translate to SRF. When we essentially back in June, or even before June, when we got placed on the list to be funded for SRF, SRF immediately started working directly with WIFIA, and together they began reviewing all of our materials. So the environmental review process will essentially close for SRF as soon as WIFIA closes it when we get through the Fish and Wildlife consultation. So when that's done, that's done. They've already started doing a legal, technical, and financial review, SRF has, and based on our discussions with them, we anticipate that we're probably about 6 months out, conservatively, from having a finalized and signed SRF loan agreement.
And the SRF interest rate is 1.4%, was that right?
The interest rate today, which I don't have the interest rate offhand exactly what it is today, but in the analysis that was done recently to support the development of the resolution, it's at 1.6 is what we use for planning purposes, and I think it's almost down to below 1.5.
Yes, that's correct. It's 1.2. The way that interest rate is calculated, it's 1/2 of the state's general obligation bond rate. So if they sold bonds on the market for 2.4%, the SRF loan is 1.2, which is where it sits today.
Okay, and the SRF line of credit is up to $100 million. So would it make sense for us to draw on that before we draw WIFIA funds at a higher interest rate?
That's a good question, and we went down that we went down that line of thinking, and we talked to both the WIFIA staff and SRF staff, and there was a desire from both of those agencies that we work together and work with both of them and fund the project jointly through both of those agencies. And so what they would like to see, and as the table in the staff report reflects, they would like to see an even split between the money that we take from both WIFIA and from SRF. So yeah, essentially when we got placed on, I think it was back in April when the intended use plan did come out, that was our initial knee-jerk reaction, which was, let's minimize the WIFIA funding and fund everything through SRF, since we have, almost, I think it was almost 105 million that we had got from SRF. That program is, and this is one of the reasons why we didn't include them in the 2018 rate study as a slam dunk, is that program is pretty overprescribed. And so I think there's a desire from their staff as well that if we have this partner funding source, that we use some of that as well and take some of the pressure off of SRF. So that's what they've asked us to do, and that's how we structured our financial analysis, and that's our plan at this point in time.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Other director questions? Sure. Okay, comments?
No,
Comments are fine.
Oh, I just want to say thank you, because I was part of CFAC when the rate study came forward. This has gone on for a very long time. I think council has had the objective of bringing rates down. We're finally seeing it come to fruition, and I appreciate the work of staff and all that it's taken to get to this point. And I just want to appreciate that, so thank you.
And I did, you have some questions? Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Councilmember Hiller. Director Hiller.
Thank you very much for correcting that. I enjoy being called director.
It's like home, huh?
Yeah. So a lot of members of the public are concerned about this being a non-voter, in other words, taking on debt that does not require vote of the public. How would you respond to those people and their concerns about this vehicle for financing facilities projects?
So as explained in the presentation, by going through the WIFIA funding, the city is going to be saving up to $28 million. If we were to actually do a bond, which requires voter approval, it would be more expensive for the city.
Okay, but that doesn't hit the point of the question, which is people's concerns about the city taking on more debt than the people who live here want to take on. So that's just kind of a general comment I hear from lots of people. Can you address that?
This is a normal way that financing for wastewater treatment plants or water reclamation facilities are financed in California. even if it was bond finance, there's obviously a payment stream to become, people's taxes would be increased in order to pay for the bond financing. So either way, you're going to have to find a stream of payments to pay for the bond financing, whether it be revenues from the wastewater treatment plant or whether you're going to raise taxes to pay for the bond financing. So also, the way it's structured, it will only allows WIFIA to get to the water rates and the sewer rates and not to any other funds of the city.
Yeah, if I could add, Councilman Heller, or Director Heller.
Thank you.
So at least from the legal side of things, through the funding through WIFIA, there's no legal requirement for there to be a vote on this funding. And so if you want the legal answer to it, there's no legal requirement. Whether or not there was going to be some sort of plebiscite or referendum or vote, that would be a policy decision, but there's no legal requirement to do that. And as my co-counsel Anita pointed out, in terms of a risk for the city, that's one of the reasons why the Morro Bay Public Facilities Corporation is being created, because just like any corporate structure, any obligation that's taken on by that corporation, if there's for some reason a problem down the line, the only assets that can be touched if there's any default or problems are the ones of that corporation. So in short, if there's any problems that emerge down the line, it's just the corporation that's liable, not the city.
Okay.
And I think the city manager had some thoughts on this too.
Just, I know it's been said before, but I just want to reiterate that there was a Prop 218 process that involved the public extensively to weigh in on, and again, in a protest format, but the rates that support this project.
Well, my question wasn't specifically to this project. In doing a little research on public facility corporations, I found that some cities in California consider it a conflict of interest for the council members to also be the directors. Can you comment on that?
We do not feel that it's a conflict of interest for the council members to be the directors. The council often forms a joint powers authority or other member entities like a successor agency, and the corporation is sort of a similar entity, and so we do not feel that it's a conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you.
So I remembered my other question, and it may be for Mr. Collins or, anybody, our program manager, and it's this. This $28 million, $28 million in debt service savings and potential further debt service reduction from the SRF loan and the $5 million grant that we should be receiving from SRF. When will that translate in the ability for us to have feasible rate analysis based upon project costs that could allow us to address the policy we established for potential decrease in collection amount from our end-line users for water and sewer rates?
Good question. We anticipate having something before council after we've received and selected the bid for the pipeline conveyance system. That'll give us a much better indication of where the total costs are going to be. Certainly, we don't want to bring something forward and start collecting less than the full authorized amount and then have to go back, several months later and then raise it back up. So we want to have a little bit more understanding of that, as well as understanding what the SRF rate will be. So we should know all of that, I would assume, probably in the summer. I get head nods over on the other side of the table. They have that discussion. Again, the council adopted a rate review policy. This is not to raise rates. This is simply to look at the opportunity to collect less than the authorized amount, if the revenues are there and the expenses sort of balance out to support that.
Thank you. Another question?
No, I don't have any question, but I have a comment.
Okay, then I'll take a comment from Director McPherson.
All right. Yeah, I want to echo Councilmember Addis's statement about how appreciative we are to the staff for the hard work that they have put in to get for us an incredible amount of low-interest financing. And I know it took a lot of work and it took a lot of time, and they've done it for the ratepayers, and it is going to allow us to eventually, hopefully, reduce rates. And I noticed that Los Osos is considering, or is probably going to be forced to paying higher rates for just their sewer than what we are currently going to be paying for our water and sewer. And so it's really a great job, and I want to thank the staff for doing that. It's helped the citizens tremendously.
I will echo that. I guess the process started a little over 2 years ago when we initially submitted our application to WIFIA. We were hopeful and ended up being chosen as one of 12 or 13. 12, is that correct? 12. Communities across the country with an innovative project that WIFIA would consider lending money to. The day has come to realize the benefit of that, which is a significant reduction to this city's costs for debt service, approximating $28 million at least for now, and probably at least that much or more once we receive SRF funding. So the potential really is, with the great work of staff and our legal counsel, to receive reductions in debt service of close to $60 million, which will translate hopefully into the ability to collect, I'm using this word very carefully, Mr. Collins, collect lower rates from our end-line users, and I am very appreciative. This was not a slam dunk. There was a lot of advocacy that was done. I want to call out our congressman who was involved in helping us secure this and advocating for us, Congressman Carbajal, who we appreciate very greatly, and offer my thanks with that. I move adoption of resolution number PFC 01-20 approving financing of the water reclamation facility project with proceeds from the United States Environmental Protection Agency under the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act.
Second.
Not done. Adopting resolution. I got to read these four things. Approving the wastewater system project installment sale agreement, consents to assignment to U.S. EPA, and approves the wastewater pledge collateral pursuant to Section 4.5A of the wastewater installment sale agreement. Number 2, approving the water system project installment sale agreement, consents to assignment to U.S. EPA, and approving the water pledge collateral pursuant to Section 4.5A of the water installment sale agreement, approving of the WIFIA credit agreement for the wastewater system project and the WIFIA credit agreement water system project, and finally, approving the assignment agreement wastewater system project and assignment agreement for the water system project. Did I get that correct? Yes.
Now can I second?
You can.
Okay, thank you. I second.
Director Heading moves staff recommendation. Director McPherson seconds. Any further discussion? If not, we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote.
President Heading?
President Heading says yes.
Director McPherson?
Yes.
Director Addis?
Yes.
Vice President Davis?
Yes.
And Director Heller?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you for that. That adjourns the meeting of the Morro Bay Public Facilities Corporation. We will take a 5-minute break, and we will reconvene as the Morro Bay City Council. Thank you.